Let's kick off the new year by diving into our mailbag. We're answering some of your Mariners questions coming up here on the first Locked On Mariners of 2024. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, January 1st, 2024. Happy New Year. This is Tiding Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on. That's LOCKEDON to get yourself started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. This is Mailbag Monday, the show where we answer your Mariners questions. Let's get into them. We're going to start here with an anonymous question. With everyone drooling over Jorge Soler, what do you think are the key factors of why the Mariners have not signed him? Strikeout rate, clubhouse issues, cold bat and colder climates, money, Soler holding out? None of the above. I think they just got a better deal on Mitch Garver, or what they feel is a better deal on Garver. Colby, you feel any differently?
No, I think they probably view Soler and Garver as both pretty much DH onlys, and so what it comes down to is which one do we like more and at what price? I think there's a pretty good chance Soler is going to get a third guaranteed year, and maybe that's something that Seattle didn't want to do. I also think there's a pretty good chance that he's going to get more than 12 million AAV. So if you're the Mariners and you have these two guys as being roughly equal offensively, and honestly, there's a lot more evidence to suggest that Garver is just the better all-around hitter. But if you think they're pretty close offensively, and one of them's willing to give you a deal, quote unquote, and the other one's not, and you're the Mariners with your payroll restrictions being enforced on you, then I think it makes sense to prioritize Garver in that case. Now, doesn't necessarily mean that they won't also go sign Soler. I'd say it's highly unlikely, but we don't know for sure that they're not still interested in Jorge Soler. I think this was just about, hey, Garver, we got to a number and a structure with Garver that we like. Let's just get that done right now, and then we'll adjust if we need to. I think it's just more about, the Mariners got a deal that they like with Garver. They didn't want to miss out on it. They knew that they needed to upgrade the lineup, and bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And if Soler's holding out strong for two, that was wrong, whatever. But if Soler's holding out for a guaranteed third year, or maybe even a guaranteed fourth year, or he wants 16, 17 million a year, Garver's the guy to go get if you can get him for the contract Seattle did. And it'll be interesting to see what the actual contract is. We still don't know, but there's a mutual option for a third year. I assume that part of the $24 million that's guaranteed is a buyout for that year, which lowers the hit in in year one, since it's only a 2-year deal. So maybe Soler wasn't willing to do that. There are a lot of factors at play here. I don't think really any of them are concerns about his strikeouts or cold weather. I really don't think that's a issue.
No.
Not from the Mariners side of things.
No, not at all. To simplify what you're saying even more so, I mean, even if the Mariners look at both of these guys in a vacuum and say, we think Soler's a little bit better, are the pros of Soler insignificant enough where Garver at $12 million is worth more to the Mariners than Soler at like 16 a year?
Right. Because I mean, at that point, it's would you rather have Garver and whatever you get for the extra $4 million or whatever, or Soler? Right. So, and we'll see what number Soler comes in at. But no, I think it's just about Seattle got a good deal with Garver, and they took it.
Yeah. Next question here from Mariners to the Moon: is the front office goal of creating a sustainably competitive team over a decade span even possible with the recent restricted payrolls, not to mention the RSN problems going forward. If not, how do you see Jerry in the front office shifting their tactics to try and make it achievable? I mean, you got to draft, develop, and trade your ass off, right? And I think a big key to this is replenishing the next wave of pitching and lining that up pretty soon here, sooner rather than later, because you might get to a point here in the next few years where you got to think about trading Logan Gilbert because of money issues. They have like Teddy McGraw and Cole Phillips, and we'll see what Michael Morales is. We'll see what Darren Bowen is. We'll see if Walter Ford is anything, but that's really it right now. What do you think, Colby?
I would say first thing, they do need to, start replenishing the pitching depth. They need to take more college arms in the next draft. I know it's not a very good draft class. I don't know if that applies to just the offensive players, but that's my early indication is that it's a pretty poor draft for bats. Second, the good news is that the Mariners have the next wave of offensive players is relatively close to the big leagues. They should be here within, some of them will debut this year. Most or a lot of them will debut next year. So that's a good sign. But also, I think we need to just pump the brakes a little bit here. We don't know for sure what the finances are going to look like next year or the year after. So we don't know if this is I don't want to say a one-off, but we don't know if this is like something that's a short-term kind of problem or if this is something that's going to extend long-term. We don't know what the issue is with the RSN. We know what the issue is, but we don't know what the solution is. So it's a little tough for me to sit here and be like, well, obviously for the next decade, the Mariners are going to run a $150 million payroll. I don't know. So
I mean, payroll has risen since the rebuild, right? They have brought it slowly but surely back up closer to where it was pre-rebuild, but it still hasn't gotten to that point, obviously.
no,
But
this was
we've
probably
seen
the year
now
it's
like
gonna get there.
3 times at least over the last 3 or 4 years, Jerry and Justin thinking that they would have, X amount of money, and then they end up getting Y, and then we don't know why,
Right.
but clearly like plans have changed on the fly over the last couple of off seasons, and I just don't really have any faith in that changing where until I see it, right? Until I see it. John Stanton has to earn the benefit of the doubt here. He doesn't get that
Sure.
at all. So
Absolutely, but it's also entirely possible that this is a 1-year thing and they have the RSN figured out next year and Major League Baseball steps in or something like they're doing with other teams. We don't know. We don't know the long-term impact of the
but
RSN.
once the RSN is figured out, like
They'll find
what's the
something
next
else, yeah.
excuse? What's the
Sure.
next excuse going to be?
I get it. But we do not know for a fact that the Mariners payroll is going to be what it is now for the next 10 years. And if it is it sustainable? Can you win 54% of your games over a decade without raising payroll? You can, without raising it significantly. You can. It's just a really tough, window to hit. And yeah, it means that you're going to have to trade guys when they start getting expensive, kind of like what the Rays do, which nobody's as good at it as the Rays are. And I really don't want to see if Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander are. So you can still sustain a good window with, payroll staying relatively stagnant, but no, you shouldn't try. And we'll see if the ownership group ever decides they want to step up. But it just, you got to start operating. I think Jerry and Justin, in a way, they're going to have to start operating a lot like Tampa or try. And that's not usually a formula for success, but
all right, we got some more questions of yours coming up in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Sailors, the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can also find bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays. With football coming to a close, you know what that means. Mariners baseball is almost here, and so is betting on Mariners baseball. But while you wait for the boys to take the field, you can still bet on the Seahawks, Kraken, and Huskies basketball and football. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's LOCKEDON. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And as a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And before we get back into your questions, as some of you know, because you've already made use of it, we now have a Google Doc where you can submit questions. That's mostly for those of you that are not on Twitter. Don't ask us questions over there. Just a couple of notes, and I figured that we were going to have to hammer out some things. So 2 things that I've noticed. No one really signed off their name on any of these questions. You got to sign your name off. Like, we don't see your name. Like, we don't see your email or anything like that if you submit a question. So if you want your name actually read along with your question, you need to sign that off in the actual question submission. And then secondly, some of you submitted Fanfiction Friday trades. That's not the place to submit Fanfiction Friday trades. We're going to have a separate Google Doc for Fanfiction Friday trades, and we'll post that in the description of our episodes that come out on Wednesday when we're looking for Friday trade ideas. So yeah, just it makes things a lot easier on us to kind of sift through all the questions and all that if we don't have to go through a bunch of trade ideas and a bunch of things that are not related to Mailbag Monday, essentially. So yeah, just keep that in mind. All right, let's get back into these questions. Teddy wants to know, is the current Mariners situation with funding and ownership interference similar enough to the Anaheim situation that Jerry may seriously be looking at leaving if changes aren't made in regards to funding? So it's pretty different in terms of the actual situations or the circumstances. In Anaheim, the reason that Jerry left was he was basically just a figurehead. Like, he wasn't allowed to do anything unless Scioscia and Moreno approved of it. And he was just kind of tired of that, right? He wasn't like, he was the GM, but he wasn't allowed to be the GM, basically. Like, they wanted to control all the player personnel stuff.
Right.
So that's why he left. But yeah, I do think this is getting tiring for him. I can't imagine, because I mean, it's his reputation on the line, and
Sure.
and Stanton is impacting that. And it's making his job more difficult, and it's making Justin Hollander's job more difficult. I don't know if it's getting to a point, because I'm not Jerry. I don't talk to Jerry, despite what some of you think. And I don't know, if this is really coming to a boiling point or not. From my perspective on the outside looking in, I know I'd get pretty tired and over this, especially when it's impacting my reputation directly.
Yeah, a couple problems. One, deserved or not, Jerry already has the reputation of a quitter across baseball. If he quits another job, he might not get a third one if he even wants it.
Right.
So, I mean, despite the resume that he's built in Anaheim, which was pretty solid, despite not being able to, run things essentially, and now what he's done in Seattle and the rebuild and all that stuff, Jerry's definitely a good baseball guy. But if he quits on a second team, and I'm just saying this is how it will be viewed by the people who make these decisions. If he quits on a second team, then he might not get a third chance. So if he wants to continue to do this, he's kind of stuck a little bit. But also, it's not really all that similar, like Ty said, because basically Artie Moreno and Mike Scioscia were dictating player move, like who you sign, who you trade for. Like,
Yeah,
those were not
like Jerry at least has control over that. It's
yeah,
just
John Stanton's not doing that.
What control, what power is being taken away from Jerry and Justin is the span of the group that he can look at, group of players that he can
Right.
look to acquire, essentially.
Right. Essentially, Moreno told him what players he had to go get. Stanton's basically been telling him, like, you can't afford to go get that guy.
Yeah.
Like, we're not even going to give you the chance to get that guy. So it's different because Jerry wasn't going to sign Albert Pujols. Jerry wasn't going to sign Josh Hamilton. Those weren't Jerry moves. Those were Moreno moves. And
Yeah.
as far as we know, Stanton hasn't done that.
Right.
He's let Jerry pick the players. He just hasn't let Jerry essentially have the full buffet of players to pick from because of the financial restraints.
I would say that the only way that Jerry would probably leave, or at least this is what he would be angling for if he's getting tired of this and wants out, is if another team comes calling. Because at that point he doesn't look like a quitter, right? As you're saying.
Sure. But it's hard to get a job that's better than president of baseball ops. Like there's not really a title higher than that. So,
True.
if you could sell it as like, I'm going back home to Colorado or whatever, right? Then maybe.
Or
but,
if like if the Boston, and I know Boston's also
Yeah,
has
maybe.
their own,
Sure,
payroll issues,
sure.
but like if
Boston's
the
not
Boston
exactly
job
Sure.
opens, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The Yankees GM job becomes a thing. They're interested in Dipoto. Like, there are definitely spots where he can move, but in all seriousness, like, there's very few jobs as good as Seattle, and that's because Jerry has built up a pretty darn good ball club with lots of good young talent. So there's not a lot of jobs that are going to be better than Seattle, even with having to deal with the Stanton clause. So I don't think Jerry's looking or even thinking about moving on from this job yet. A couple more times like this, and maybe finally we'll have the last straw, but I don't think he's looking to greener pastures yet.
Next question here. This is another anonymous one. Help me understand why signing Garver means we're out on anyone else who DHs. Getting more than 90 games out of Garver seems unlikely. Is it possible to acquire a lefty with over 100 WRC plus against righties and have them hit the other 72 games? Does that sort of player not exist, or would they cost too much to justify playing so little? I mean, if you're acquiring that guy, you're not acquiring him because you think Garver's only going to play 90 games. The hope here is that Garver is going to play a career high in games, and the way that you're hoping to accomplish that is by playing him in the field as little as possible.
There's also some pretty good sign. Like Garver missed the first 2 months of last year, and then around July 25th, the Rangers just said, "Screw it, he's the DH. Like we're just gonna keep his bat in the lineup." And there were 60 games left to play on July 25th. Garver started 55 of them. And then obviously tack on what he did in the playoffs. So Garver played, he was plenty durable when he finally came back from the injury. The Mariners aren't giving him $12 million if they were convinced he can't play 115, 120 games. You could still go get a left-handed hitter and, plan a little bit on Garver getting some days off against tough righties and whatnot, but it can't be a pure DH. Just you can't. You can't have two full-time DHs on your roster. It just doesn't work. So who's the lefty bat? And that guy really has to be able to play a position. So who's a lefty who is a above average bat who can also at least manage a outfield spot or manage, not even first base really doesn't work. They pretty much have to play in the outfield or not first base to really be in consideration here. So who is that guy? And if your plan is to only have him start 70 games, why are you going to give that guy, 9, 10, $11 million when you might only have $25 million to work with? It's just not really a good fit. So you're banking on Garver going and playing 120 games. I'm reasonably optimistic he can if you keep him out from behind the plate fairly regularly. So I don't think you need that guy. I don't think that that's a wise use of money or prospects to go trade for a guy who you're planning on getting 70 games, and that's it because they can't play a like Jock Peterson. Makes no sense for the Mariners. He doesn't because he can't play the field. So you're just gonna have a guy who's a DH only on your bench for 100, for 100 games, for 115 games. Like it just doesn't make a lot of sense to spend money on that bat.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of guys that would fit this mold that aren't going to cost you really anything. Might even be minor league deals, and we've talked about them on the last couple of shows. Austin Meadows, Jared Walsh, take a shot on those guys, and they could, in theory, be 100 plus WRC plus guys from the left side that help you
Right.
at the DH spot if Garver isn't able to play, 120, 130 games, but
Meadows can also play the outfield. He
he
can.
can he can be stationed there.
And by the way, if you wanted to do this, Mike Ford is the answer.
Yeah.
Does Mike Ford seem to make a lot of sense on this roster as it's constructed right now? No,
No.
he doesn't.
No.
So why would you go and spend, 10 times what Mike Ford's going to cost you on a very much part-time player whose entire value to your club is dependent on Mitch Garver getting hurt? It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. All right. Next question comes from the Mariner Mojo boys. Shout out to Colton and Joe. What was your personal favorite moment of 2023 for the Mariners? Can be before season started, as well as like WBC stuff with Harry Ford, interview with Jerry Dipoto. Yeah, I'll say, the Dipoto, like for us personally, the Dipoto interview was pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I think our favorite moment of 2023, though, like we talked about on the last episode, was the fundraiser. Like for us personally, like stuff to do with the show. Yeah. Raising $15,000 for those in need. Really cool. What was that? 150,000 meals, right?
Yep.
Crazy.
Mhm.
Crazy. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite moment of 2023
Mhm.
just for us.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to track the progress.
Yeah.
Mariners specific, like the team, like Julio going like 17 for 21 in a 4-game stretch is
That was
definitely way
pretty
up
cool.
there.
That was pretty cool.
Julio's go-ahead home run against Kansas City
That
in
was
the 8th.
yeah,
That was really good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Just a couple hours after you said that he shouldn't never smile ever. Yep.
Yeah, that's totally what I said.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep. That was
Mhm.
my favorite moment of 2023 was you getting
Sure.
canceled on Twitter
Sure.
for that.
They
Yeah.
tried, but they failed. But yeah, I mean, like personally, the fundraiser, number one, and then like baseball wise, for me, Kirby on Felix Weekend, that's just hilarious. Like, how can you not
Sure.
smile and laugh at that a little bit? And then like Julio's insane August, that was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. A couple others. JP walk off against the Rangers, then sign in the camera
Ooh.
after. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's way up there.
Yeah.
How about the 4th of July game where Logan Gilbert threw the complete game shutout and Mike Ford almost hit for the cycle?
Yeah. JP's diving double play against the Angels to get Matt Brash out of a jam down in Anaheim was pretty sick.
And,
Teo's walk off against the Blue Jays, just for personal reasons.
Sure. It was the one time Teo was a valuable player.
Yeah.
What about when they scored like 7 runs off of the Astros bullpen in the 8th after being down like 5-0? That was in April or May. May, I think, early May, I think. That was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there were some good moments. Unfortunately, a lot of bad. Mostly April, May, and September. Like everything in between was okay, but
right.
Right.
Yikes. Do you think adding a 6th starter could be in the cards? And do you think they should have considered adding one, even if it's just for a bit in the beginning of the season to keep innings down on a young staff? Example like Chris Flexen signed for $1.75 million. Good show, and thanks for taking my question. Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, so they really need to beef up their pitching depth right now, because we talked about this, I think, on Wednesday, if I remember correctly, that your number 7 right now behind Hancock, Wu, Miller, etc., might be Jimmy Joyce, which actually it might be it's probably Darren McCacken, which I know there's someone in the comments that would be that's very excited about that.
I thought McCacken was going overseas or something.
No. He's still in New York. He's still in New York.
He's still in the org?
He's still in New York.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
How? Yeah, it's probably McCacken then.
Yeah, Darren McCacken's probably your number 7 right now. You need at least like a couple of Tommy Malones right now. Like
sure.
And that's usually something that you acquire like February, right before pitchers and catchers.
Yeah.
Even late. After pitchers and catchers report. So
I would go out, I would get like a pretty safe starting pitcher, veteran, but not to use as a 6-man rotation, just to put Wu back in AA, where he can work on changeup or slider or cutter or whatever it is, and you can kind of control his workload a little bit better because Wu doubled his career high in innings pitched last year. That might have a hangover. There might be a hangover effect early in the year. So I want to protect Brian Wu a little bit, but I guess you could do that with a 6-man rotation. He only pitches once a week, basically, but I would just rather send him down to AAA. I can short script him if I have to, and if I can get just a number 5 starter, run of the mill number 5, you know, I don't know, Johnny Cueto or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I would rather do that. So
Yeah.
but I do think a 6-man rotation is on the table, but that feels like something you should only do if the guy you're getting is like Imanaga, like a legit, like middle of the rotation guy.
Yeah. The other possibility here that's on the table is getting a guy that can slot into the bullpen that you can sell on the idea of competing for the number 5 spot. So Colby, you've mentioned a couple guys like Shintaro Fujinami and Jacob Junis for that possibility.
Basically what Seattle did with Luke Weaver at the end of last year, where it's like, we're going to stick in the bullpen, but you're probably going to get some spot starts because we have to manage Wu a little bit.
Max wants to know, based on the crazy market for pitchers, Giolito getting $38 million, are you convinced the Mariners are holding on to Bryce Miller and Brian Wu due to high prices for their replacements unless the team offers them a deal they can't pass up? Do you see them staying through the winter? So I touched upon this a little bit last week. It's basically like, all right, if you look at like a Bryce Miller trade, right, and you get Randy Arozarena in return for him, just for the sake of the example, right? Your lineup obviously gets better, but is your roster actually overall better than having Bryce Miller in your rotation, having a guy with that kind of upside as your number 4 behind the likes of Luis Castillo, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby? If the answer is no, then how much is it going to cost you to make up the difference in the rotation to go out and get that replacement? Yep. And if making up that difference ends up taking you into the Lucas Giolito, Frankie Montas range, then you're not getting that guy. And therefore you're not making up the difference. And therefore, do you think that your roster is actually that much better or even better in general to any sort of degree? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because basically you're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right. Basically, it's like, would you rather have Randy Arozarena and like Johnny Cueto, or Rich Hill or Dakota Hudson, like one of those guys? Would you rather have Arozarena and that guy, or like Kepler and Miller?
Yeah.
Which one is a better team? Probably Kepler Miller. So yeah, the Giolito AAV didn't really surprise me that much when I thought about it. I thought maybe he'd get like 17, 18, so it's not a drastic overpay. The Montes one at 15
His
million.
His home run issues though, and then Fenway, like.
Well, it was interesting is that the park factors, actually, I looked it up. He'd only given up 22 home runs in Boston. Really? I assume because of the monster. He'd give up a ton of doubles, but they wouldn't quite clear the monster, would be my assumption. So.
Or was he giving up like a lot of like dead center home runs?
Maybe. Yeah, he might have been. But yeah, like I'm fine Seattle didn't jump into that market at 19 million. The Montes getting 15 million after only 1 inning pitched last year. That's a pretty large pillow contract, like a prove it deal. Like, not I was into Montes, not at 15 million.
How did he get more than Severino and guys like that who are very similar ideas where it's like they've been good in the past, they aren't good right now, or they're hurt right now? Like, we're taking a shot.
I don't really get it, but so yeah, I think because it's going to be very expensive to replace Miller or Wu, in theory, if you trade them, I think Seattle's, what they've probably done is what you've suggested, which is we're listening on them, but you have to blow us away. Like, it has to be so ridiculous that we can't say no. Otherwise, we're going to keep them, and we're going to, we're going to get a lesser hitter than Randy Arozarena, but probably a player who's worth roughly the same in terms of just straight up wins above replacement for prospects instead. And that's how we're going to do this thing. Because again, like, is Randy Arozarena a better hitter than like Lamont Wade or Mikey Yastrzemski? Yes. Are they both likely to be 2.5 win players? Yeah, probably in that range. are both going to cost Bryce Miller? No. So you go with a cheaper one. So
Yeah.
to me, unless you're getting like an all-star for multiple years for Wu or Miller, I'm keeping them, and I'm going the cheaper route with the bats.
Agreed. All right, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.